So we'll just start then with roll call showing that all council is present with the exception of Councillor Coons and Councillor Osher. And we'll jump right into the agenda with the first topic, Police Department 101, overview of police operations in Orono. So I'm going to assume that Sophie will start out with this and segue in.
I actually have Josh all set up to be the beginning, the middle, and the end of this, and I'm only here if there's a question for me.
Great. So Chief?
All right, we're off and running at Master of the Space Bar. So I normally am far better at telling a story, I think you all know, but I do have a presentation tonight. I wanted to shock a few people and actually have some slides. So please bear with me. It will not be to the caliber of a Bell Rider slide presentation, but it'll be rudimentary at best, and I'm going to attempt to share the screen, and we shall see how this goes. And that isn't the one I wanted yet. All right. So this slide, when I was all done, I actually realized that I have a number of slides, but this slide would probably have said it all. I think that if everybody recognizes Captain Scripture, he literally embodies the philosophy of the Orono Police Department and everything that he did and the way he acted. And the symbol next to that is our department symbol, which that's a written and artistic view of what he did. And I'll talk more about that as we go through. And that symbol was actually painted by a couple of students from the high school last year as a community project. They did that on our wall in our hallway. And I have the coin here somewhere, which also mirrors that I carry with me. And that says everything about the Orono Police Department, but I will at least expand upon that because it's necessary. So tonight, these are the four topics that Sophie had guided me to talk about. So I'll talk about the policies of the department and how those are formed, and then we'll get into the training that kind of reinforces those policies and the supervision and oversight that takes place to make sure that the training and the policies are working. And then if we've failed in some way or somebody has a disagreement with how we've done our job or they want to complain about how we've done our job, there's a process for that too. So the last thing will be the complaint investigation. All right, so policies. The Academy, the Maine Criminal Justice Academy, their board of trustees and create minimum standards that by state law we have to follow. So there are 12 mandatory policies. I won't go over all of them. They range in everything from, they're all high risk, high liability, low frequency type things that we do in police operations. So it would be use of force, barricaded suspects, mental health crises, dealing with mental health crises, pursuits of cars, or things that garner a lot of attention that are very dangerous and they're high liability. They have guidelines that we have to follow and language that we have to follow. So the two bullet points that are up there are from the use of force policy as a for instance. So that statement of conditions as to when an officer is justified in using deadly force, there has to be that statement within our policy and then what those conditions are. So in this instance, it's, that we can defend ourselves or another person from the immediate threat of serious bodily injury or death, as long as we've made an effort to advise the person that we're a law enforcement officer attempting to do our job, that person has used or is threatening to use deadly force. So there's a series of things that we have to meet in order to use deadly force. That's just one of the many specific standards that are within that particular policy. And de-escalation is another particular part of that policy that's necessary. So I have to have all of those standards within our policies, those 12 in particular, and I had to show the Academy that I've met that standard at the end of each year that we have those policies. So that's the kind of the basic requirements that we have that are required by the state. We are also accredited, as you know. It was CALIA. Now it's the Maine Law Enforcement Accreditation Program. So there's an additional literally 140 some odd plus standards that are required that we have within our policies. And we have just over 100 total policies. Those standards will fit into all of those policies. Again, for instance, is the personnel selection standard requires that if we're going to hire someone, part of that hiring requires a polygraph, a background investigation, and a psychological evaluation. And we go a little bit further to then try and find the officer that's going to fit best with us and our philosophy of compassion and respect and service mindset. But those, at least those requirements, and those are very intensive. Both the polygraph and the psychological evaluation are very intensive testing processes that really get to the heart of an individual and whether or not they're suited for law enforcement. Another standard that's required by MLEAP is related to the bias-based policing. And as you can see there, it's making sure that we comply with the current laws and the training that's necessary each either annually or biannually. And then I do an annual review of all of the data related to that. So if we've had complaints about the way we policed, and I also just automatically review the warnings and summonses and arrests that we've had based on race to see if there's any discrepancies or disparities there. And much of this, I hope you understand that much of these slides are really for me. There's not a great deal of information presented on the slide, but it cues me to kind of talk about a few of these particular subjects. So I'll jump to training. The academy, again, the Maine Criminal Justice Academy requires that the minimum requirements for a person to work even part-time in law enforcement, to take any sort of law enforcement action, it requires this law enforcement pre-service course, and there are 3 phases. And phase 1 is a 40-hour online course that people can sign up for and pay for themselves and do, and there's a test at the end of that. And it's kind of the really bare nuts and bolts of policing. Phase 2 is an in-person 2-week school, and they happen all over the state. Members of our agency teach at those. And it's more of a hands-on, classroom-based, practical type teaching environment, and covers more in-depth, a little more in-depth of constitutional law and criminal law and investigations and use of force and those types of things. And in phase 3, if you're hired by an agency, phase 3 is the kind of the field training program of at least 80 hours. The state requires at least 80 hours of that hands-on actual field training. And that at least qualifies a person to work as a law enforcement officer. Now, I'll talk more about what that means to the Orono Police Department, but in theory, that person could go then be a part-time police officer. And phase 1 and 2 have testing processes. And then the academy requires the basic law enforcement training program, and that's an 18-week course in-house, and it is a comprehensive and intensive full gamut of everything to do with law enforcement in the state of Maine. And it's just an expansion of that pre-service school. Again, everything to do with constitutional law, ethics, fighting, shooting, driving, civil rights, dealing with mental health. It's all encompassing, and there's a number of testing processes throughout that 18 weeks, and then a final certification exam for the officers. For us, and this is either before or after the academy, we do a field training program, and it's special officers that are trained, field training officers that have been certified to train other officers in both general law enforcement and also how the Orono Police Department conducts business. So they're and this is at least the law enforcement pre-service certified officers. So they've gone through phase 1 and phase 2, and they begin our field training program. And after the 80 hours, they're at least capable of then taking law enforcement action with their field training officer. We have a minimum of 8 weeks of that field training program. It can vary. We have someone right now who has never been a police officer, never thought of being a police officer until his mid-30s. So he's likely going to need a little more than the 8 weeks of direct supervision and direct training. And we've had other people we've hired that have experience that are already police officers, so we modify that 8 weeks down a little bit once we've seen that they get our philosophy and that they understand the field of law enforcement, and they've proven that they're capable. The continued training, so this won't seem like a lot, but the academy requires another 20 hours per year to maintain their certification. And 10 of those hours are laid out for us each year. They do 2 or 3 years in advance, and they determine what those subjects are going to be that every officer in every agency in the state has to do that year. And it's much to do with case law updates within the state of Maine, Supreme Court case law, and the First Circuit Court. And in addition to that, they'll add in other topics. So we've had implicit bias, we've had cultural diversity, it could be situational use of force, it could be substance abuse, dealing with mental health. So they'll determine what those training topics are each year, and those are mandated. The other 10 hours are kind of elective for us. we kind of choose what that's going to be. We, within our own policies and within those main law enforcement accreditation program standards, have certain trainings that we have to do every year or every other year. And this is just some examples here: the ethics, bias-based policing, use of force. And, I threw in case law and new law updates, and then occupational safety, the things that Sophie determines that we should talk about each year as a town, and environmental safety, and then driving. Every couple of years we'll do some retraining on driving. So there are certain subjects, certain policies that require that every year, every other year, we do a refresher training. We just happen to have a weekly online training program through an organization that it's a legal organization that stays up to date nationally. So we're bound by, obviously, the main state law, First Circuit rulings, and Supreme Court case law rulings. This organization takes the whole country's circuit courts and sees what is trending for cases that are in courts and how they're turning out. And we get a weekly kind of 5 to 7 minute talk on those subjects. And it can be use of force, it can be civil rights, it can be search and seizure. It's all the hot topics that are current and they're case law from other circuit courts that might be headed our way. So we kind of get an idea of what might be coming and how we should be thinking about our operations. And every year we do this continuing, professional development and specialty type training. So this is just a smattering of that. An officer just graduated from the academy from a 2-week methods of instruction school, which certifies him as an instructor for the state. And during that 2 weeks, he learns about building lesson plans and objectives and how to build the content and an evaluation process after the courses. So this is just an idea of some of these are 1 day, some of these are week-long trainings that we send our officers to every year in order to maintain their professional development and kind of increase their specialties and enhance their capacity as police officers. All right, here's a very black and white or blue and gray overview of the kind of the supervision and oversight that takes place here in the agency. The only time that there's not a supervisor working is from 3 a.m. to 7 a.m. And that is, we don't have the resources to have a sergeant working 24 hours a day. So that is a time of day that is kind of the least number of calls. Granted, the types of calls that come in from 3 to 7 can be rather intense, but they're few and far between. So again, it's a better use of our resources to have our supervisors working from roughly 7 a.m. to 3 a.m. in the morning. The captain and I are here Monday through Friday, occasionally in the evenings on the weekends, but basically Monday through Friday as additional oversight and watching the operations. The oversight by the sergeant can be very direct in that if it's a traffic stop that's turning into an arrest or an OUI, if it's a serious incident, if it's an officer who's been on an incident for a long period of time, the sergeant's going to go and be a part of that incident. And their job is to provide support and provide some advice and supervision if needed on those scenes. They can't go to every call. We do about 6,000 calls a year. So obviously they can't be at every one, but the reports are read by the supervisors so if an officer works tonight, the supervisor that's working tonight is going to get their reports when they're done. So they'll know if there's content missing or if there's something else that needs to be done with that report because they kind of have an idea what the call was. And the captain and I make a very good, valiant effort to read every report that comes through the agency as well. So there's a little bit of oversight there. If we see something that looks a little off to us, we can ask about it and follow up. Additionally, since the implementation of our body cameras in 2016, we've implemented a quarterly review of those videos, and it could be cruiser videos as well, but the idea behind that is a couple videos per officer every 3 months are randomly selected. And I say randomly in that one is randomly selected. The other is an arrest or a use of force that we know about that we can pull up and watch the video so that the officers we're just making sure that their tactics are correct, that they're treating people with respect, that there isn't anything, that they're not maybe, not practicing officer safety tactics, or is there improvement that might be needed? Is there an area we could help train somebody in? So those reviews are done and documented. And if we see something that needs to be addressed, it can be addressed then. So regardless, we are going to do things that sometimes people aren't happy with. So this quote, it's not a quote, but it's the first line of that policy regarding complaints against law enforcement officers. We do understand that we're not effective unless there is consistent integrity and professional conduct by our police officers, and that there must be some discipline associated with that if that isn't taking place. So this is from our website. We get that there are times when we know that most of our interactions with people are not on a positive, they don't start off on a positive foot. We're called to something or we discover something and it's less than pleasant. We're not usually called to come, enjoy a birthday party or something. So we know that everything that we do, and something that we preach here, is that everything we do has an effect on other people. In fact, you know that as well. Everything you do has an effect on other people. So our officers are expected to know that their job is to protect and serve. And if they aren't doing that, if they're failing in that, the only way we can know about that sometimes is if somebody's willing to come tell us and allow us to look into it and correct the behavior. Those complaints can come in, those complaints can come in a variety of ways. So, let's get going. It can be in writing. Someone can email us, they can send us a letter, they can show up at the station to make a complaint, they can find an officer on the street and say that they want to make a complaint about an interaction. They can call us, and it can be done anonymously. We're not going to ignore an anonymous complaint. And something that's not on here is that when we read reports or when we view videos, if we discover something that doesn't feel right to us, we can initiate our own investigation, and it's been done. And it's done more often than you might think. I've read reports before, the captain has read reports before, and we just had that little bit of a weird feeling about it and need to know more. And when we look into it, we're not happy with the result or the behavior, and we've addressed it. So generally, if someone complains that, you're never on my street, or, the officers are going too fast, or I feel like they didn't wave to me on the street, that's going to be handled by the supervisor. The supervisor can answer that question and address it informally or even formally with the officers. If it's behavior-based, if it's a violation of policy, or if there's a question of whether they're operating in a legal way, those complaints will go to the captain. That's his job, to investigate those. So that process will involve hopefully interviewing the complainant if they're willing to fully talk to us, get a statement from them. If there are witnesses involved, we can talk to them. We will review the report, so there should be a report related to the incident. And then we can look at the body cam or the cruiser cam. And then additional data that we can look at, if the complaint was one of, someone feels targeted, that we're targeting a particular person or a particular group of people, we can look at the data to say either their behavior is consistently not that case, in cases, say, written warnings and summonses and arrests, or we could say this is outside the norm for the number of people that are normally charged in that group. So we can use that data to kind of help either prove or disprove the complaint. If there's a law violation, so someone's committed a criminal act or violated someone's civil rights, we would likely bring in another agency to have that investigated. When at the time Captain Wilcox left here, when he became the chief in Old Town, he entered into a veritable mess related to evidence and evidence storage and the theft of evidence. And it was a very, very difficult time, and he was astute enough to have two other agencies come in to investigate, two other officers from other agencies, senior officers. One investigated the administrative process within the agency, and another investigated the criminal process. So that way it was transparent and objective, and he took no part in that, and his agency took no part in that, and they just allowed another agency to come in and do that investigation. Generally for complaints that are written to us or complaints that are given to us, the person making the complaint will get a letter in return kind of telling them the findings of the complaint, whether it was founded, whether there was a violation of policy, whether it was not a violation of policy, but we still chose to take some sort of action against the officer just to improve behavior. And then if the person who made the complaint is not happy with that result, ultimately they can go see the town manager, and she can investigate it further to see if we objectively evaluated that complaint. So just recently, I'm going to give you just a couple of examples. I had hoped to show you a video, but I wasn't able to get permission to show that video because it's pending some legal action is still pending, and I respected their reasoning for not wanting to show that video. But the first one was a very recent OUI arrest. And the reason I give you these examples is I think it encompasses all the way from policy to training to supervision and then complaint. An officer was working in the evening and was dealing with a noise complaint at the avenue. As he all done with the complaint, he came outside and there was a car parked in a way that would jump out at anybody. It was completely askew in the parking lot and kind of in a parking space and out of a parking space. And there were some people around it, and he just inquired what's going on here. And the men that were there said, our friend is very intoxicated. He was attempting to drive. We've taken him out of the car, taken the keys, and put him away for the night. And the officer did the compassionate thing and simply said, I'm glad to hear it. Nice job. Appreciate what you guys did. Now, no good deed goes unpunished. It was an hour later. He's driving through the same area and sees the car in front of him driving through the parking lot with no lights. And it's the middle of the night. And the driver pulls into a parking spot. Now, in this officer's mind, he's hoping, I hope this is one of the friends parking the car appropriately. But he stopped, didn't turn his lights on, but did stop and walked up to the car. And it was the original young man who was very intoxicated, 20 years old. And so now he's faced with, well, I guess I have to do what I'd hoped to avoid doing and what I'd hoped that the other people had taken care of. Now he has to do his job. So he attempts to put the person through field sobriety, and the person is very angry, basically because he's a police officer dealing with him. And he's making that very clear, and he's attempting to video the officer with his cell phone. And the officer was smart enough and calm enough, because the friends were there again, to suggest that the friends take this person's phone and continue to video the encounter, so that the person he's talking to can feel like it's still being videoed, gave the phone to them. Ultimately arrested him for operating under the influence. And I've only seen portions of the video of the intoxilizer room, but the abuse that the officer took the whole time that this person was in the intoxilizer room, it was vulgar, it was loud, there was profanity, there were suggestions about sexual acts, it was abusive. And the way the officer did his job with a calm demeanor the whole time, I can't even tell you how proud I am of that officer. He just continued to do his job. And ultimately the person refused to take the intoxilizer test and was taken to jail. Shortly thereafter, that person made a phone call to the captain wanting to complain about being stopped and how he felt targeted and that the stop was inappropriate. And the captain gave him the option of filling out a complaint, asked for his email, and said he would send him or would send him the form, that would hope that he would fill it out to send it back in. Never heard anything more from the individual. Now, that we don't need the complaint to come back to us in written form. We still did an investigation of the incident. So the video was watched, the officer was talked to, the report was read, and it is, in our opinion, an unfounded complaint. The person was driving, the vehicle was moving, that was an intoxicated driver from before, it's driving through a parking lot with no lights, it's unsafe. The person is clearly making poor decisions. There's no reason to think that he's parking his car for the night because he's now driven it twice in this state. So the officer did his job reluctantly, did his job very well. So my point here is that the officer not only followed policy, but he followed the philosophy here initially, which was, you know what, hey, someone just attempted to drive a car while they were intoxicated, but I'm gonna let that slide. You guys have done the right thing by trying to remove your friend. But then later when he sees the same problem cropping up again and it's a dangerous situation, he does the right thing, which is to act and enforce our OUI policy. And then throughout that gets a lot of abuse merely for being a police officer, and I get that in the environment we're in. But he takes it professionally, doesn't get baited, doesn't get angry, doesn't use sarcasm even. He just attempts to do his job and does it well. So that's one example of, he follows the policy, he follows the philosophy of this agency, which is compassionate and respectful law enforcement. And then there's a complaint, which we review and come to a conclusion. The second one is, and it was said recently that in a council meeting, it would be nice if people didn't have to call 911 for mental health crises. This was a mental health crisis back in the summer. A young man clearly having a mental break. He was hallucinating. His reality wasn't everybody else's reality at the moment. He was pounding on a door. He was yelling at people. They didn't recognize who he was. We get called. So Officer Angelo, Sarah Angelo, and Officer Dan Patterson, our newest officer, are attempting to deal with him. And that's why I wish I could show you the video, because she's just trying to see if she can calm him down and get to the point where she understands what he's going through. And there's no ability to reason with him at that point. But a vehicle pulls into the driveway. He zeroes in on the vehicle and starts yelling and swearing and marching towards the car. And she does her job by trying to get in front of him to stop him. And it's very clear on the video. He hits her very hard in the face, knocks her back into the car. Fortunately, the new trainee acted, and which sometimes we worry about with a trainee, whether they're going to act when it's absolutely necessary. He acted, and then Sergeant LaJoy was there, and he acted, and they got him under control and put him on the ground, and attempted to talk to him. And that I wish I could show you that too, because he is not there, and he is screaming at the top of his lungs and not making any sense while they're attempting to get him under control. So I tell you that to tell you a couple of different things. They followed policy, and she followed her training. She was dealing with a mental health crisis, and she was attempting to de-escalate him. When there was a threat, which the people in the car were now in danger because of the way he was 6'1", decent sized guy. She placed herself between him and the car and took a bit of abuse for that. But once they got a hold of him, the sergeant, they could hear him on the video telling the new officer, "We got this." He actually tapped the new officer on the shoulder and said, "Let go of his hand." And he talked them through how they were going to roll him over and get him under control. And it was all very calm, and it was very, again, just one of those moments where you're saying, that's exactly what I expect and exactly what I want. And it's a great demonstration of the supervision part of things. So policy was followed, their training was followed, and then the supervisor acted in a way that just made that the result was fantastic. And quite frankly, the supervisor was speaking with a member of the public who has been here for a long time, who knew this individual and was on the scene initially, and was stating how this is unusual for this person. He doesn't know what's going on. So we followed up with him. And this person has been a critic of the police department, and he hasn't been wrong. So it's not necessarily a person who just loves the police department. He's had his issues with us and pointed out those issues. And he stated how impressed he was with the way that situation was handled. So that's another example of, I think, we have a policy, we have the training, and we follow the policy, and then the supervision, and then if there's a complaint, we manage it. So I'm going to show you one more thing. I appreciate your patience. I'm going to attempt to, this video came out in August, and it ties back into something that, we'll see how this works. Ties back into something that I started with. So go back to here, and that will go away from there. This is a video of a gentleman who's been a police officer since the 70s, who changed his career into a risk management career related to law enforcement and corrections and firefighting. And he's a legend in his ability to see where there's risk and then talk about how there's ways to mitigate that risk. So this is Gordon Graham, and I think you'll get something out of this.
Gordon Graham here with today's tip from Lexipol. And today's tip focuses on something that's near and dear to my heart. Today, I want to talk to my younger friends in law enforcement. We are counting on you to accomplish two very important tasks to find the right balance for us. If you're wondering what I'm talking about, stick with me and I'll explain it. In the not too distant past, we valued officer safety so much that we often gave up trying to build relationships. It wasn't really our fault. It's the way we were trained at the academy. It's what our field training officers emphasize. We were taught to develop a mindset that everyone in every situation was going to try to cause them harm. Sometimes we could develop a sense of paranoia that remains in our policing culture even today. I'm not saying this is good or bad. I'm just saying this is the way it is. And now we're living with the results. You may have noticed that police-community relations aren't so great right now. You know the details. I won't rehash all of this, but let's cut to the responses that affect you directly. Many years ago now, law enforcement reaffirmed the importance of relationship building through community-oriented policing. More recently, there's been a push towards procedural justice and police legitimacy and full transparency. Again, these concepts promote relationship building through giving people a voice, demonstrating neutrality, and being respectful and trustworthy. So Gordon, what's your point? Okay, here's my point. You, as a young cop, are being pulled in two different directions. Our law enforcement culture tells you to focus on safety. Our community culture tells us you've got to be kind, respectful, and courteous. I got to admit that we're having difficult times figuring out the right balance, and not just locally, but around this great nation. This brings us
Josh, you need to unmute.
practice officer safety tactics, but we also want.
Can I assume we missed some of that? Was it merely because I stopped talking and the computer decided to unmute me? Was it smarter than me?
Yes.
So I want to drop back. How long do you think it was?
It was about 10 seconds.
All right.
The right balance between officer safety and respectful kindness. We got to be safe, think things through, and practice officer safety tactics. But we also want you to continue being respectful and kind, as you've shown yourself to be over the years. Your second task is to show us what this looks like and teach us how to do it. We believe it's possible to both build relationships with community members and simultaneously demonstrate consistent and reasonable officer safety tactics. We're just not entirely sure what that looks like and when the balance is just right. You need to help us figure it out. Your generation is very good at building and maintaining relationships. My generation is very good at planning, strategizing, and coordinating events involving tactics. We need to find the balance between these two approaches, and we need to do this quickly. You are the people who can accomplish them. And
So here's where I want you to really pay attention. So if I've lost anybody, I've been a student before, you start to drift, heard his voice a little bit long, here's where I want you to pay attention.
not to show you how old I am, but way back in 1973, my break-in officer, long before we had field training officers, about a week into it, hey, Graham, yes, sir, you want to be a good cop? Yes, sir. Give me $1. Give me $1. And I'm thinking, is that the way it works? He says, no, the $1's for you. See if you can find the eagle. There it is, Kevin. I found the eagle. What's it got in its hands? Well, technically, Kevin, eagles don't have hands. If I say eagles have hands, they have hands. All right, eagles have hands. We can rewrite bird history. What do you see in the hands? I see some arrows in one hand and some olive branches in the other. You want to be a good cop, Graham? Pretend you're the United States Eagle. Always extend the olive branches of peace to everyone you contact. And simultaneously, always have the arrows of war ready just in case they're needed. You know, that's the balance, folks. You do your job right, you treat people right. Officer safety and kind, respectful behavior are not mutually exclusive. You can make it happen. And that is today's tip from Lexington.
So if you remember what I showed you at the beginning, if I can get back to it, and we shall see. Oh, good golly. All right, so this is where Josh, there we go. It all falls apart right here. So if you remember in the beginning, showed you a picture. Do we see this right here? We've had this on our symbol since 2016. And around 2015, I thought we needed to change our the symbol that we had at the time. It had been around for a while, and I wanted something new. And there was an intern, I think the town manager will remember, named Holly Bauer, and she helped. She was a marketing / artistic major, and she did this. She helped with some guidance and multiple iterations of it. And I probably drove her crazy until we got to this picture, this eagle holding the olive branches and the arrows, kind of overlaid, and the deeper picture behind Chief Orono, the water and the trees and the mountain, with our respect, compassion, and vigilance, and the mission of the Orono Police Department. So this came out in this video by Gordon Graham was just at the end of August, and it to me, it validated, this is what I think, this is what I've thought for many years. We start out with attempting to kind of treat people with respect and kindness and compassion, and work from there. And if we need to, we'll step it up and do what we have to do to get the job done. So with that, I'm assuming I've either generated questions from what you've seen, or there's something missing from that you intended to ask about. So feel free.
Josh, what I'm going to do is, first of all, thank you so much. That was really good, informative. I'm going to check with Sophie to see if she's got anything additional before I put it out there for questions from the council.
So I have just a couple of things to follow up with Josh, and that is, as he was doing the presentation, a couple of things really stood out to me that I want to just reinforce. The first is that he talked about the Criminal Justice Academy policies. Those are minimum standards. Most of our policies exceed those minimum standards and reflect national best practices. So it is not like we get a policy template and just do find and replace to put Orono Police and throw it on the shelf. A lot of work goes into those policies. I also, our field training program is very different than what most departments that I've ever worked with have, in that the field training time is significantly longer than I think a lot of departments use. It's standards-based, so he talked about 8 weeks, 320 hours. That's a minimum, but there is a booklet that gets generated with the curriculum and the testing that happens throughout that field training time to keep everybody on track. While he showed you the roll call video, talked about the roll call videos that they get, podcasts. I just wanted to highlight that's something everybody does. That's not just something Josh does, that everybody in the department has access and is expected to listen to those every week. And our body cam reviews, that's at least quarterly. That when I get a rumor through the rumor mill that happens to land on my desk, body cam video gets pulled if we can narrow it down. That is not something that just happens twice a quarter. That's something that happens at least twice a quarter. And I guess I will kind of leave it there.
You make a good point. Any use of force that we have now, we have the video associated with it. So all those uses of force are reviewed as well by the captain and by I, just to make sure that we're not seeing something that maybe we need to train somebody more or we didn't like. So that's an additional layer of review.
Great, thank you guys. So I'm just gonna put out to the council to see what questions people may have.
I have a couple. So there was a term on one of your slides, and I don't remember which slide it was, that I was interested in, that I'd never heard before. But my process questions are: I have two. Is there a hierarchical use of force? Like, is there a do this, do this, do this, and then do this that the police officers learn?
So that's great that you asked that question. When I started, it was called a use of force continuum.
Okay.
And it started, it looked like stairs. And it started with officer presence in the uniform and verbal commands. And then it moved to, soft hands, take, compliance techniques, and then maybe pepper spray, and then maybe baton, taser and baton and canine, and then firearm. And what was determined nationally years ago, so this is 20 years ago, was that use of force continuum and the way it was being trained was causing hesitation more than anything else. And officers were being injured more as a result because they felt like they had to go through each one of those steps when it might be this step that's necessary immediately. So many years ago, they moved to what's called a situational use of force model. And I'm sorry, I don't have the graphic for it, but it's the officer standing in the middle of a picture, and there are options around the officer, and it's, passive resistance in one bottom corner, and what would be a good response to passive resistance, and then it's active resistance, and then it's I'm not going to get the next two wrong, but it's active fighting, and then active fighting and escaping, and then finally, it's dangerous, life-threatening activity. So the officer looks at what the situation is presenting to him, and he or she chooses the correct, the most appropriate response to that level of force that they're seeing or they're aware of. So they might be aware of the subject, aware of their skill, aware of their history, known, and there's weapons involved. So he or she may leap to a more appropriate response immediately in order to gain control of the subject. So it's a use of force continuum rather than use of force. It's not a use of force continuum anymore. It's a situational use of force model, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I recognize the four corners from restorative justice. Is the next question, if committee doesn't mind, is how does the academy have the same selection policies like a polygraph and a psych exam that you have?
Yes.
That Orono does. So they have to go through that.
Yes. Yeah, both of those forms have to be sent to the academy. Not necessarily the details of those tests, but I have to sign off on who did the test and when it was done, but for both the polygraph and the psychological evaluation. Those have to be sent to the academy to show that they were completed. And the polygraph will, like the polygrapher will put in that statement, no disqualifying conduct. They'll state whether they passed or failed and whether or not there was a qualifying conduct. You don't pass or fail a polygraph, but you are either truthful or not completely truthful. And those are the types of things that are sent to the academy. And then successfully completing a psychological exam, that is signed off on, and I put the doctor's name, and that gets sent to the academy.
So that happens prior to them going to academy anyway.
Prior
right?
to their acceptance, yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
And my last term that I didn't know, I never heard this before, was drug interdiction.
Drug interdiction. My wife said the same thing when I showed her my slides. It's interdicting drugs. It's knowing what to look for typically in traffic stops that would tell you this might be a courier of drugs. So a drug interdiction thing might be you stop a car and there's two people in the car and you're able to get them apart and they don't know each other that well. They're not even going to the same destination when you start asking them questions. So they're merely just two couriers that have just been thrown together. And so that's an extreme example of what drug interdiction would be, but there are certain signs to look for with cars and vehicles and people to get an impression that maybe there's drug trafficking taking place. And I have one officer that's really good at it. But he basically bought our portables through seizures of asset forfeiture seizures where there's been a lot of drugs and paraphernalia and money. So it's the interdiction of drugs before they get to their destination.
I see. Thank you, Josh. I always learn so much from you. So thank you for your presentation. I was kidding when I said I don't really listen to you. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Yes. So it was interesting to hear that we have around 6,000 calls a year. That seems like a lot, but I'm sure it's not. But my question is, and I don't expect that you have the exact numbers, but could you give us a sense of how many complaints you investigate each year, and what volume is initiated by the department, like internally, and which or what volume comes from external complaints, roughly?
Sure. I bet we don't get more than, and Sophie can help me with this, maybe 2 or 3 complaints from community members. We probably find that many ourselves through reviews of reports but don't get me wrong, these are low-level complaints. I don't know that I've ever heard of an excessive force complaint in my time as an Orono police officer. Here, we'll have like maybe a false arrest complaint, or the officer was rude, or I don't think he had the right to stop me. But even those are kind of rare. It's mostly about, I don't think the officer treated me appropriately. And like I said, I think we probably find an equal amount ourselves just through reports review and video review. And again, those are still also very low level, and it's more, I think Sophie had asked me or wanted me to speak to an event where we were called down to a restaurant. Someone was very angry with the way he'd been treated inside the restaurant, and the restaurant itself was a little discouraged with what they felt they were being treated, how they were being treated. And our officer got down there, and as he was starting to deal with the situation, a comment was made about America. And the officer responded with, just that he disagreed, and then went in and did his job. And that person complained to the agency about the officer's response to him. And a review of that showed, well, the officer didn't do anything wrong. He didn't violate any policies, but we'd rather he not give his opinion. So we handled that. It was more of an informal, hey, you didn't help the situation at all by giving your opinion. The other person's fully entitled to theirs, just accept it, don't respond to it, and do your job. So there was no discipline taken, there was no policy change, but it was a learning experience for the officer, and he learned how to better do his job and make it a little easier to accomplish his job without creating animosity.
Josh, were you saying two complaints a year?
Yeah, I think it's probably only really 2 or 3 complaints that we actually have to investigate per year. I could look it up.
Like that people give us.
Yeah.
Absolutely. What we generate, or it doesn't take very much to trip us pulling reports and video. And I would say we do a lot more than 2 a year of that. That one feels
perhaps, but maybe not documented. It's usually,
informal.
They're more informal, and
we wouldn't document it unless it rose to the level of having to open a formal investigation, right?
Right.
And from my perspective, so anytime Josh and Dan Dan does the investigation, Josh reviews Dan's work, captain. And anytime that somebody is not satisfied with the results of that investigation, they call, email, demand, whatever works for them, a review out of my office. And so that's when I go back over all of the evidence, all of the body cam video, the reports, understand what the general expectation in law enforcement is, ask questions of other agencies if I need to make sure that we have given them a fair investigation. And we do that so that it's not a matter of the police department being able to investigate itself and then say everything is fine, go about your business. That there is that appeal. I would say I probably get an appeal once every 3 years or so. It's been a while since I've had to do one. And I think that the reason for that is the investigations that come back, the captain is very good at explaining the lengths that he went to in the investigation and why it's founded or not founded.
And I think those appeals are typically, on those occasions, it's just been necessary for maybe Sophie to explain it differently, explain why we did what we did differently, and then it becomes a little more, I don't know, understandable by the person. There was no misconduct, it was just a misunderstanding, and how we explained it might not have been enough for the person to understand, and then Sophie explained it differently, and suddenly it made sense. So
Meg, did you have anything additional that you'd like to ask? Okay. Any other counselors?
Yeah, thank you so much for that presentation. And I'm concerned to hear that someone hauled off and slugged a police officer in the face, and yet I realize that you have a very dangerous job, and that is one of the challenges of your job. You're interacting with people who are not in their best, not behaving their best, and that's why you got called. So I'm sad to hear about that happened. I have been thinking about the demonstration you gave us of that piece of equipment that sort of reminds me a little bit of Spider-Man, puts the net out. And it sounds like that was too quick an interaction for that to
Absolutely.
be
It was so
deployed.
sudden. So sudden.
Yeah, and so have you deployed those since we purchased them?
We have not. You know, I wanted to speak back to that incident where Officer Angelo was hit. It's funny, the emotional response that I get just watching that video, because I hate to see one of our officers in a situation where they could have gotten hurt. And then I remember, you know, if I look at it objectively, she was doing her job and she was placing herself in between what could have been a victim. And so, again, it's just that pride of watching my people work. I just don't like to see it. I don't like to see them be in a situation where they could be injured. We just the other night, another situation where someone, in this case, was suicidal. It was one of those calls where somebody called their ex-boyfriend, said he was coming up from Portland and he was going to kill himself and he had a gun. So sometimes those calls come in and it's, all right, we'll keep an eye out. Well, this person showed up from Portland 2 hours later and happened to be seen on Park Street. So there was a trooper in the area at the time, and there was an Old Town officer nearby, and Sergeant LaJoy, and I'm so impressed with his performance on both of these situations. And he turned into, I'm drawing a blank, the last road on the right before you get into Old Town. Kind of a dirt road.
Do 4-lane?
4-lane, I'm sorry. I always think of Stacy Lane, and that's up the other end. The car pulled in there, and the guy got out, and they attempted to talk to him, but he wasn't showing them his hands. And they were really concerned about that, and he was deliberately not showing them his hands. And then he turned and ran down the road, and our officers didn't chase him. He had not committed a crime. He was suicidal, and it wasn't going to make matters any better by chasing him and trying to tackle him, particularly if he had a weapon. But they got in their vehicles and got ready to follow him at least a little bit down the road, and he went in behind a house and then came right back out and wisely had already pulled his shirt up and actually pulled his pants down to make sure that the officer knew he didn't have a gun, and gave up. And again, that is just such great operational, it's not even textbook, because there's not a textbook for that. There's no scenario where you're taught that. They used restraint, and they got him under control and took him down to the hospital. And he immediately kind of went up and down and rational. But in that situation, again, happened very quickly. That would have been a great opportunity for the bolo wrap. They'd at least been able to hopefully immobilize him, get him on the ground without having to touch him, and then maybe advance on him and try to contain him that way. So it would have been a great opportunity. It was another one of those things where it happened really quickly. And so it was a great it would have been a good application. That tool is absolutely for a very specific application where somebody's static and not really running away all that much. So good question.
So I want just one more. My understanding is from historic, I think I've told you before, my cousin was a police officer, that domestic violence calls were the most dangerous for police officers, at least when he was serving. And I've just been hearing, it's on the news lately, that the amount of people purchasing guns for the first time has gone up. You know, our nation's dealing with a health pandemic and an emotional crisis associated with having our lives be changed so drastically so that we can protect the public health of ourselves and others. It made me concerned for our police officers. And have you seen that there's an increase in incidents of calls and that there's an increase in incidents of people with firearms in Orono over the last 6 months?
No, there's probably the same amount of calls when it comes to domestic violence. I would have thought we'd have seen more by now myself. We are seeing a little more frustration between people, and we're getting little calls for that, but we're not doing any more domestic violence arrests. There have been a couple of recent suicides that our officers have had to deal with that involved firearms. There were 2 over the last couple of months. But there's usually one or so a year anyway in this area. So no, I don't think we're seeing more guns yet. And the domestic violence calls for us at least have not increased.
Well, that's good to hear. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cindy or Tom, do you guys have anything?
No, I'm just very interested in hearing what's happening. I was wondering what is our top calls? Are they usually OUIs?
We're getting more OUIs right now. Our officers are very busy. And one of our officers, Officer Angela's a drug recognition expert, and she's been extremely busy for both our agency and other agencies because it's more of a technical, more training needed, and more people are impaired by drugs than alcohol. Our most recent type of, our most common call now, that's a good question. We're not getting as many noise complaints, fortunately. I think that the students are very respectful of what the university expects of them right now. Mental health, it always comes back to the mental health problems. Probably at least every other day are calls related to mental health issues. Those are staying the same or increasing.
So, Josh, I'd just like to thank you for that presentation. That was very informative and makes us proud to have a police department that operates the way you do.
Thank you. I like to think, Sophie always says how great we are. We're probably better than other agencies. I think that we are the right agency for Orono. I'm very familiar with other agencies and their chiefs, and I'm very impressed with some of the other chiefs that I know, and I know what they accomplished. I think that no one else could come in here and do what we do here in Orono based on the way we do our jobs. We're the right agency for Orono.
Great.
So yeah, I'll echo what Tom says. I think, Josh, back when I was first here, I remember not really understanding, still new, not really understanding a lot of what happens within certain, the police department and the fire department. But I went over to the Special Olympics games, and the interaction of your staff with the individuals and the passion that they showed for that really led me to believe that you have a unique group of individuals. And so when what we're dealing with right now with the pandemic and issues that happen with that, I worried, like I said probably a few months ago, I worry about assumptions made and generalizations about a particular type of profession or whatever, because I do view you and your staff as a different thing than what we're seeing. And any interaction I've had with citizens is, me personally, I've never had anything, negative comments or anything like that. So I'm glad I live in this town, and I'm glad you are a chief, and that we have the group of individuals that represent us. So thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So Sophie, is there anything additional before we move on?
I don't think so. Josh is right. I think we have an amazing police department and an amazing command staff. I really do. And I think this was offered, number one, we had talked about it earlier this year, but it's offered as a starting point. I think the one thing that you will hear from Chief Ewing often is that we're not perfect and we know it. And there are always ways that we can learn and grow. It is frustrating a little bit when we're trying to reach out and learn and grow and build relationships, and we have people who want to lump us in with everybody else and not recognize all the work that's already happened. And if we have problems, we want to know about them. You don't have to give your name, you just need to let us know. But I really hope that if people don't have concrete problems, that they take some time to learn about who we are and what we do, and then lend their hand to help us move forward and grow in the best way for the community.
Great.
Gosh, can I ask one quick question off this topic a little bit? Do we still have a resource officer at the high school with the new school schedule? Is he there just 4 days a week?
He's there every day.
Every day?
Yes.
Okay. I was just curious what was going on with our 2 days on, 3 days off kind of schedule that we've got.
And I will give you a little teaser. There's more to come when it comes to kind of the community services philosophy we have.
Thank you.
Great. So Josh, thank you again for the time, taking the time to give us Policing 101. I feel like I should get some certificate. So thank you and have a great night.
Thank you.
So we're going to move on to number 3, amending the land use ordinance to regulate solar installations. Is that?
Yep, I can start. So the last time we talked about solar, we went over a presentation that sort of outlined what the ordinance language would cover. So this is the first draft of that ordinance language. It's not a complete draft. There's still a section missing there at the end, still being researched. And a lot of the language is taken from some model ordinances that have come out. And as we can discuss as we go through it, certain pieces of that were derived from looking at kind of general overarching themes of solar in a variety of different communities. So whether or not those specific numbers necessarily apply to Orono is still, it needs to be looked at a little more. We need to take this kind of foundation and starting point and kind of fine tune it so it matches kind of the on the ground scenario of the community here. But so the general purpose of this ordinance section, the amendment to the land use ordinance, is to create a land use specifically for solar energy systems, as we don't currently have that. So there's not really a good way of classifying these projects currently. To zone them properly, specifically for the larger scale systems, where you might not want those in certain areas of town. And then to create some standards outside of our normal, ordinance or land use standards, our site plan standards that would apply specifically to this land use. So if you look at the first page and the top of the second page, that just defines the land use. And then it breaks down these systems into either roof mounted or ground mounted. And then you also have small scale, medium scale, and large scale. And this is what most ordinance language and policies around solar seem to do. They seem to split it into these 3 categories. And the intent behind the 3 categories seems to be pretty consistent. Your small scale systems are those meant to be accessory uses for homes or businesses, but mainly for individuals. So you would generally see those, permitted as an accessory structure, like other things, people would have permitted, like a garage or a shed, anything like that. The medium scale is kind of the next step up, where it's not necessarily a massive commercial facility, but maybe someone owns multiple properties and they want to have a system that's producing power for a few different buildings. And then you have your large scale, which is the really big farms that are purely for commercial purposes. So the numbers here in the definitions were taken from the model ordinance that was through MMA and developed between Maine Audubon and the Natural Resources Council of Maine, and I think a few other parties that they worked with. You know, it seems that a lot of these ordinances have differing kind of classifications when it comes to what they deem each size to be. For instance, you know, we looked at the Belfast ordinance, draft ordinance at the last meeting that we talked about this, and their large scale was anything above 4 acres. And the logic behind that was most likely that a 1 megawatt system right now, from what Dave Mylan and I found out talking to a few different people, 1 megawatt would probably translate to needing about 4 or 5 acres. So that's probably where they got their kind of line for large scale systems. And then if you see, you know, that this model ordinance was recommending 2 acres for large scale, you can probably assume that they were saying, well, we think a 500 kilowatt system should be considered the large scale. But in speaking to someone, the contact for that model ordinance, it was pretty clear that they were coming up with numbers that were just kind of a general starting point. It wasn't that, you know, 15,000 square feet as the upper limit for a small scale solar energy system. That's the industry standard, and that's what makes sense for every community. They were looking at a mixture of rural communities and very urban developed communities, and they tried to find some sort of middle ground where everyone could start. But obviously, certain places have more land available, are closer together. So, you know, the size might vary from community to community. So 15,000 square feet for the small scale systems seemed like a lot for us to only require a permit. So that's something that we want to look at more. We have a couple of these projects that have been permitted in town already. So kind of taking an average of what a solar system for an individual home, you know, what does that look like? What's the average or median size for one of those? And then basing that number off that. So I think those numbers can be developed a little further to fit our community a little more.
Kyle, can I quick before you move on? Those
Yep.
2 systems that I've seen that have those ground mounted systems that have gone up in Orono, and one's going up on Bennick Road. Can you just like approximately how big are those so I can picture what we're talking here when you talk about small and large and medium? You know how big those ones are? The one on Main Street.
The one I looked at, oh, not the one, I'm not sure about the one on Main Street. I mean, those didn't have to go to the planning board.
It's over by the horse stables.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, I'm in Route 2. The one on Bennick, I think, was a couple thousand square feet.
Okay.
So I was thinking, I mean, just, you know, obviously I want to look at it more, you know, than just 2 cases. But it seems like at least, you know, 5,000 square feet might be a much better starting point to look at than the 15,000 square feet. Yeah, but I was hoping to do some site visits as well, contacting the local property owners to see if we could just go out and take a look, you know, up close and kind of see what the size of their systems looks like on the ground and from the street, and, you know, just in the area so you can see the actual impact on the ground. And I think that'll go a long ways in helping to make these clarifications with the sizes. Along the same lines, you know, possibly doing some site visits like we did for the marijuana establishments to kind of see what that looked like on the ground. If we're able to go view some of these larger scale systems in other communities to kind of get a feel. You know, it's one thing to look at it from satellite imagery from above, and you can see this massive kind of scale of, the system. But I think it would be useful to kind of be on the ground and be next to that. So I'm hoping with our next conversation that those numbers can be clarified, and I would be able to have some visual aids to go with those numbers so that people could get a feel for how that size translated to what we were talking about. So if you move on to a little further down on page 2, move to the zoning aspect and the permitting authority. So roof mounted systems, it doesn't really make sense for a roof mounted system of any size to go for site plan approval. Site plan approval is primarily looking at impacts on the ground and to the surrounding area. So if you're putting something on an existing structure, you're not really creating any new impervious cover. You're not, going into existing vegetated area or creating any more developed area. It's simply going on the roof. So whether it was, someone single family home putting up a few solar panels, or whether it was a big commercial building of a couple, few thousand square feet covering their roof in solar panels, we felt that that was better suited staying as a permit through the code officer, but then giving the code officer the ability to pursue expert opinions when it comes to some structural questions, if those arise. Because the planning board would not really have the proper review criteria to look at those things either. So then small scale ground mounted systems, as I mentioned, these would be, your accessory uses for individuals. So you probably want those to be permitted by the code officer and not have to go through site plan approval. However, giving some kind of strict criteria for the code officer to look at, and for that person to be able to reach out to other departments for advice, whether it's life safety or the town engineer, or reaching out to some third party person for additional opinions. The medium scale ground mounted systems, these are anything that is above a small scale system, probably up to a couple acres. These could probably be a principal use on a lot or an accessory use, depending on the land available. But we would want these to probably have site plan approval. If you had a couple acres of panels going in and that size system, then there could be some decent amount of work done on the site, and depending on the district, you could be in close proximity to other uses and other people. From what we learned talking with people, it seems that this size system isn't as common really anymore. The most prominent uses here would be on either end. You would either have the really big, large scale facilities, or you would have the individual homeowner or business, looking for the small scale system. But we also felt that it didn't really hurt to leave that option for the medium scale in the ordinance. It doesn't, if no one uses it, then no one uses it. But it's worth having there. For instance, the difference in, if you look at the table between the medium and large scale, allowing the medium scale systems in the MDR. The MDR, you might not want a 20 acre large scale solar energy system in the middle of the MDR because that can potentially take away land that could be used for residential growth for the town. The MDR is in the growth area of the town. You want to preserve that land for town infrastructure and for residential use, which is the intent of that district. But a medium scale system being, perhaps around an acre, there are plenty of lots in the MDR that have single family homes and would still have room for a system of that size. Maybe that person lives on that lot, but they own multiple properties in town and they want to have a system like that. So that was the reason for that. Then the large scale systems would only be allowed, as kind of shows in the next section, as principal uses, meaning you couldn't, it would have to be the main use of the lot. You wouldn't have someone living on a lot with a large scale system. And those would really be the ones limited to, kind of select few zones. The forest and agriculture district, the low density residential, which I do think is, there could be some discussion for, the commercial one, an economic development zone, and then the industrial district and university district. I mean, the university district would really be up to the university whether they wanted a project like that. Industrial district, we don't currently really have anything zoned as industrial except for Ayers Island. Commercial one and EDZ are both our heavier commercial light industry districts. And as far as the F&A and LDR districts, there's a lot of open space and large lots in those districts. The forest and agriculture district extends on Route 2 as you go out of town towards VZ. There could be, and with these larger systems, they need to be in close proximity to three-phase power. And, within a mile or a few miles, I think, of a substation. So there's only so many areas that these facilities could go in town. You can't just put it anywhere. So the F&A in that specific part of the F&A could be one of those places where it could, be feasible. So, but then all of those medium and large scale systems would require site plan approval. So beyond the standards laid out here, they would have to require all of the standards in the land use ordinance and meet site plan review criteria. So you move on to section 3, and that's where the specific performance standards start. Section 1 just defines what we had already talked about the small systems being considered accessory uses and the large scale being principal uses of the lot. Section 2 talks about the permitting, and this is what I was talking about with the code officer reaching out to other town departments for their expertise when making a decision on these projects. And then there's, a line in there, the code officer may obtain and consider the professional opinion of other parties in rendering a decision. So if there isn't enough, evidence or expertise between, the parties in town, they would have the option to reach out to someone maybe specifically more knowledgeable about solar that they could make that decision with. 3 gets into the dimensional requirements. So these are, again, obviously up for discussion. Most places, communities seem to not set a building height maximum for roof-mounted solar energy systems. In a lot of our zoning districts, the building height is 35 feet or 45 feet, depending on the district. A roof-mounted system is usually fairly close to the roof. We do have similar exceptions for things like chimneys and other, kind of accessory uses or structures that might be coming off of the roof. But I mean, certainly a number could be inserted there if people were worried about, some kind of exception going in and a visual nuisance being created there. 2 and 3, were taken from the model language that was on Maine Municipal's site. This is another thing that I would want to verify with, kind of looking up on the ground existing systems. Is 12 feet, a normal height? Would that, create any burdens for any potential people looking to do this? Does that need to get bumped up a little bit, or is that, leave a comfortable enough room for those projects to take place? And then ground, the third point under height there, ground mounted systems that are principal uses would just need to conform to the building height requirements of the zoning district that they're located in. And with that, it ties into the setbacks in the next section, where if you have the medium or large scale systems, there would be a greater setback requirement, so that those aren't, abutting, kind of going right up to property lines. It leaves more space for buffers if needed to be implemented, while hopefully not causing problems for the operator of the solar system, creating too much shade. So it would leave enough room for both parties involved, ideally. But the small scale systems would simply have to meet the normal setbacks of whatever zoning district. So it would be similar to any other accessory structure on a lot. So the last kind of dimensional aspect of this would be lot coverage. It seems pretty consistent with all these different ordinances that you don't count the actual panel surface area as impervious surface. When you're calculating impervious surface, you're only counting the parts of the property that are paved or are actually mounted on the ground. But if there's, a panel with vegetation underneath of it, that wouldn't go into calculating the lot coverage standard. Vegetation management, this was, some of these were recommended in the model ordinance. This again would go into effect with all of our other standards when it comes to these types of things. Removing unnecessary vegetation. There's language around that already in our site plan ordinance. So I think this just gives some more specifics. Visual impact. So this would be, I think, a big one. The first point here is that any accessory use solar energy systems, so the small scale systems that you'd find at people's homes or businesses, they should be located to the side or rear of the principal structure. And this would be one kind of aesthetic standard, and also to avoid any potential glare issues, although unlikely. It just kind of gives another barrier for that to happen on the street. We have similar standards when it comes to off-street parking in the MDR and HDR districts, where parking areas are recommended to be on the side or the rear of the lot. You can't, create a parking area in the front yard in those districts. This would be similar. I did, put in a sentence there also, that if the only feasible location on the lot for some reason is that, it be placed in front of the structure, then proper measures would be taken that it was screened from view from the street. B kind of again speaks to preserving vegetation, not going out of the way to clear more than necessary, so that you maintain those buffers for surrounding areas. C speaks to the glare issue specifically. This was pulled from the model ordinance language. It kind of gives the code officer authority to, I think, work with the operator of the system to modify, if a glare issue becomes apparent, if they can screen or buffer the system in some way so that's no longer an issue. That would be the first step. but then it gives the authority to, or it aims to give the authority to allow the code officer to have the system removed if the issue can't be fixed. And the last point there is, a lot of times they'll have fences for security purposes around the large scale systems. If that is in fact how it's developed, that there would be a kind of small elevation to the fence to allow for small animals to pass underneath, since there would be a lot of vegetation still left on the fields where these systems would operate. Section 7 there speaks to utility connections and aiming to locate all utility connections underground. That does tie in with our existing site plan ordinance. That is already a recommendation in our site plan ordinance. This kind of just takes it a step further, saying that they shall, to the best extent, locate all utility connections underground. Developing an operation maintenance plan for these large-scale systems. That would probably be part of the planning board review. And then section 9, emergency services. This again would be specific to the large-scale systems. Developing plans and cooperating with the fire department to create an emergency response plan. I think as a resource, while that system was in operation, providing the code officer with contact information throughout the life of the system, so that if for some reason emergency arrives, someone needs to be reached. And then the last one is just having a sign that identification is there if there's a problem. So the last section there is really where I stopped, and there needs to be some more research done on the actual steps of decommissioning one once a system is no longer operated and it was removed. What kind of guarantees up front during the planning process would applicants, as far as performance guarantees, things like that, how would that work? So that research is still being done. So with all that being said, really, I'm just looking to see any feedback, any things that are glaring, that are missing from the ordinance, and what specifically, beyond what I've talked about, would you like to see next? So obviously some more specifics have to be looked at, but is there anything else that jumped out?
So that was a very good job there, Kyle. A lot of information. I'm sure it's going to evolve into a bit more, but is there anything that counselors have questions for Kyle?
I have just one. Kyle, do you know if like the big solar companies, Revision or Solar Dog, if they have any state regs that they have to follow as far as installation and perimeter and setbacks and things like that? If they're working with any kind of regulations?
I believe I don't think there are state regulations as far as setbacks and things like that are concerned. I believe that would be up to the municipality.
Thank you.
Yep.
I'm just curious about the emergency services, part A. When you say developing an emergency response plan, does this plan assume, how do I put this, that some sort of emergency has happened with the solar panels, or what happens to them if an emergency, am I making sense? Like, is this more about they'll blow up, or
right,
like a hurricane will come and a tree will crash into it? Like which way is that going?
Yeah, that's something I'll have to find out more on. That was in the model language, so I put it in here. But yeah, I don't know specifically what types of problems would arise with a large scale system that require, like what specifics need to go into that plan. that would need to be covered. I don't know. I would like to speak to someone probably in the industry to find that out.
Kyle, I think you're on the right track with this. The areas that you felt you needed to do some more research and get additional information were the areas that I also thought needed a little more work. But I think it's going in the right direction.
I think it's great that the MMA had some examples for you to start with. One of the things that I'm concerned about, though, is that if we put something numeric, that it would be difficult to change it. And so there's, for example, the height of 12 feet. Like, is there some data point that says why it would be 12 feet? Is that what the size, is there a size that once, smaller installations are less than that, and once you make over 12 feet, you're talking about some other kind of technology or infrastructure that's different? Do you know how they came up with that number, basically?
So I had the conversation of sort of the dimensional aspects with someone, the contact for the model ordinance. And it didn't seem like they had a specific reason that they picked what they did. It was kind of a mixture of, we were looking at other model ordinances, we were looking at what other states have done. And they talked to some people from the industry, and they kind of took all of this together and created some estimates based off of all of those things. So yeah, I want to double check on those numbers, things like the height, the setbacks, the classifications between the systems, to get a little more specific into that, and would the numbers that we put in fit the intent of all of those things. So yeah, I'm hoping next time to have more on those specifically.
So then you have setbacks, or basically depth, amount of distance it had to be from the side lots and the back lot and the front lot. And they're actually quite large. So what's the rationale? Like, if somebody owns their property, they probably want to do whatever they can do with their property.
So in some of those districts, there's already a 50-foot setback. But the idea, I touched on it briefly, but the idea would be that, it's similar to what we talked about on Park Street, where you have this relationship between height and setback, and the farther back you go, the higher something is, it's not as burdensome on the street level. And also providing, I think the logic with providing bigger setbacks around the systems, the larger systems, is that it gives more room for potential buffering and screening. So, if it was right up to the property line, it would be more difficult to potentially screen those from view.
Good stuff.
But yeah, I can certainly look at, more examples. And again, that's why I was hoping to potentially do some site visits of the larger systems, get some, be on the ground next to one and see what that relationship felt like.
So I thought it was great, like when we were looking at the marijuana businesses, how you went and did site visits and talked to the local people, because this is very new, and it's hard to imagine. I mean, people don't necessarily like change, so it's not hard to imagine that the neighbors will not like it because it's change, and we don't want to. I don't want to put it right in their face. So I guess the idea of putting it right on a lot line or kept close to a lot line means it's right in the face of the people who live on the other side. However, I also don't want to hamstring the people who might want to invest in this, because it's a great idea to harvest the energy from the sun and use it. And I as a town councilor would like to facilitate that. So I can't tell myself whether these are going to be restrictive or not, but my goal is to try to be welcoming to people who want to do this and reduce the restrictions to make sure that we're not somehow, by taking something from an example, then eliminating some of the options for the people who would want to invest in these. So I don't know anything about the heights, but if 12 feet ends up being something that, oh, the newer technology has the racks a little higher so you can park a car under them, and use them as a carport, semi carport, then I just don't want to be inhibiting. So that's all.
So I would say that the large scale systems, a lot of times it's referred to this 5 megawatt, 20 acre kind of relationship. And like that's kind of ideal, I think, size for these large systems and what a lot of places are looking at. So if you needed 20 acres of land, you're looking at a very big lot. So that setback being a little larger doesn't become quite as much of an issue as well. It wouldn't be the 50-foot setback for someone doing this as an accessory use on their single family home lot. That would still be 10 feet on the sides and 20 feet in the back.
Yeah, the site visits will be probably very helpful just to see what it's like on the ground. My sense would be that we wouldn't want to stray too far from what we already have on the books in terms of how people are allowed to build things in relationship to property lines. I mean, I could see somebody saying, I've got a little deck off the side of my house that I would love to be able to build it right out to my property line. And I don't think my neighbors would mind, but it's not technically, do you know what I'm saying? So, I mean, I would think that we'd want to stay somewhat close to what we already prescribe in terms of what people are allowed to build and where.
Right.
Can I just one more question was, do you know, and this probably doesn't have anything to do with us as a municipality, but do people who put up those medium scale, large scale solar projects have to contract with a utility first before they can do this? They've got to have to tap into Avant or whoever our utility is at the moment. Does that sound like something that you've researched?
That's not something I've looked at too much. Dave, are you there? Can you speak more to that?
Yeah. Oh, great question. Part of the process, Cheryl, is that if someone's looking to create a facility like this, the first thing that they have to look at is how are they going to transmit it to wherever it's going. And so you have to be able to, there has to be capacity on the line. So we know that from certain areas in town, having conversations with whatever Emira is now, is that they don't have the capacity on the line. So there's not likely that there's going to be any type of a large facility in that area, simply because the capacity on the transmission line is the weak link in the chain. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that was kind of where I was headed, but yes, that's what I was curious about. Thank you, Dave.
My understanding is, and I've drawn a blank on what they call it, but basically the base station, they can't be so far away from a
Right.
Whatever that thing is called that I can't remember right now.
Substation, I think.
There you go.
Yeah, substation.
Hard one. Thanks.
Right. Yeah, it can't be too far away. I think it gets progressively more expensive the further you're away from it.
But for example, Cindy, we've looked at the data for the substation by Black Bear Hydro, and what we're hearing is that substation itself is nearer capacity. So they could probably put in a couple of small facilities there, but it wouldn't be able to handle a big one to be able to go into that substation. So it would require a completely new substation being built, which is mega expensive.
Would that impact the zoning at all? The zoning decisions where the substations are?
Yeah, so there is a map that was part of the resource, that MMA put out, that does show the substation, and if you can look at whatever your community is and see the nearby substations to kind of use that as a basis for where some of these large scale projects might be.
Kyle, my only two comments would be, if it's a small, I wouldn't want to hinder small solar use by saying it couldn't be on the front of a house. If that's, because I think ultimately we want to reduce carbon emissions and carbon footprint. So I would kind of want to say that could be done on the front. And the other thing is, in my office, we're seeing a lot more solar leases, and what we're noticing they're lacking a great deal is what happens, how a solar farm or even a wind farm gets decommissioned 20 years from now, because a lot of these are out-of-state companies that are buying up all the rights. And so I would really push for either some sort of performance guarantee or a bond for the decommissioning of these, because we're not, we don't know how to dispose of these things either at this point.
Right, and I thought the model language didn't really go into too much detail with that, so that's why I wanted to take a little more time in researching some other ordinances for kind of the best practices on that.
Yeah, that would be great.
Anything else from people? Well, great, Kyle. Thank you. It seems like you're off to a really good start on this. I'm curious to see where this goes. I'm not very familiar with a lot of this solar stuff. It's still kind of new to me, also, but it seems like a lot to research.
Thanks.
So moving on to number 4, minor amendment to the signage ordinance. Sophie, are you taking this one?
I am, at least the beginning. Then Kyle did the heavy lifting. I just created the problem. So right off the bat, we should just acknowledge that our sign ordinance is problematic. We have some significant issues with our sign ordinance, and we've known it for a long time. The Supreme Court made some rulings that make elements of our sign language obsolete. However, trying to change this is going to be incredibly heavy lifting, a lot of it. And Evan refused to do that. Kindly, gently, nicely, but said it would be Kyle's issue. And right now, Kyle's got a lot on his plate. So I am coming to you with a request that you consider a very targeted revision, simply because the town in its grant application for COVID-19 funding was awarded 50% of the cost of a new electronic signboard for out front of town hall. And so that's a $30,000 sign that we would be able to get for $15,000 and match it with $15,000 of TIF dollars. So I very much want to be able to move forward with putting the signboard in. However, under our current ordinance, nobody can have an electronic sign. And we really want to make sure that it's only the town, because we don't want to open up a huge can of worms. So the request that we have is that you update to allow within the village commercial district only, that the town shall be allowed to utilize an electronic digital sign located in front of the town office and public safety building, not exactly 100% sure where. That the sign shall be considered a changeable sign and shall meet the standards of the state statute for changeable signs, with the exception that the display of the sign can change more frequently than once every 20 minutes. So under state law, unless the municipal officers incorporate that exemption within of being able to change more frequently than every 20 minutes, the signs can't, without your permission for that to happen. So that's what we're asking for. We're going to come back and ask you for $15,000, but not today, to match the grant funds to put the sign in. But I kind of felt like I should ask you if you're okay with the ordinance amendment before I asked you to buy the sign.
Thoughts from any of the counselors?
So I like the no electronic signs in the sign ordinance, and I think that a lot of folks in town probably do as well and understand why, you know, that is how we regulate signs. It can get a little blinding if everyone's got electronic signs out. And I personally have no problem with this change, but what I'm asking is, what are we saying to the folks who say, well, wait a minute, why does the town get a special exemption? Like, what is the rationale? Like, what's the case to make for that?
The case to make is that the information that we provide on our sign are important public notices that need more than 2 or 3 lines at times. That was the whole rationale we gave for the COVID-19 funding, that we wanted to be able to communicate longer messages and multiple messages to the public. Also, that unlike a business, if people don't like what we're doing with our sign, they're going to come and complain to council, and council's going to control what happens with that sign. So I think that there is a voice that people have to regulate us a little bit more stringently than perhaps the private citizen would be regulated. Private citizen, we can't regulate what they put on a sign. You can tell me exactly what you don't want on this sign. So I think that's part of the reason. And there are other places within the ordinance that the town is exempted from its own ordinance, and it's usually for reasons like that. Like, we're exempted in places from the noise ordinance, and I think the thought is that we are going to be very careful. So while there was a bright yellow background on the display that you saw, we're probably not going to have a bright yellow background. We're probably going to try to make this look as neutral as we possibly can when we put our signs up, our messages up. But we want people to be able to see it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And if you sit at the light long enough, that you probably will see more than a very oddly at time abbreviated message that you may or may not be able to figure out that it slid on the fire department signboard.
That is an excellently articulated rationale. Thank you.
Anybody else? Questions?
No, I'm fine, Sophie. I just wanted to say that I'm fine with moving forward with this.
I'm concerned about the brightness, but that you've kind of answered most of those questions. So I still think we're going to hear from people that really want signs. So we might end up adding to Kyle's plate.
You might be right.
I mean, I knew it was coming at some point.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I always read the sign at the fire station, and I'm glad to see the things that get posted there. And I was not aware that there was more information that you felt that would need to be posted in less than 20 minutes or whatever, that you would change up regularly. So what kind of examples would you have of the things that you would be posting?
I think we would be we could post things like meetings that are happening that don't get posted now. Right now, there are times that we run up against not being able to put things out there because somebody else has it. So if the school has an event and we have an event, we don't post the school's event, even though the school would very much like us to be able to do that at times. I think the idea is not to create a carousel that just is dizzy you know, makes you dizzy trying to keep up with it. But I also think if somebody is going to sit at a stoplight for 90 seconds, you could probably get a couple of messages out to them in those 90 seconds. And if they're like other people that go back and forth all day long on foot or bike, or, you know, I think we could get some good messaging out, landfill hours, how to schedule an appointment, you know, things that we're just not able to do right now.
Anyone else have a question? Well, for me personally, I struggle with that sign out front of our building because I don't see it. It's kind of off to the side, blending in with the building, and there's usually one message. And I understand, you know, as I look at it, it's like going, we usually have like, there's voting going on, then like you said, there's school, there's all these different things that we could actually kind of be able to provide to people who maybe don't watch stuff, you know, via Facebook or I try my best to post everything you guys post, but it only goes so far. So yeah, I'm curious about this, and I think it's actually a good thing, and we'll see where it goes from here.
And I just want to point out too that pretty soon it's going to be dark at 3 o'clock. So it's always nice to have, you know, some lighted messages when you're driving out of ACE's parking lot or, you know, something like that. But yeah, we get dark early here in the wintertime.
Great. So hearing nothing more, Sophie, brief town manager's update.
Mute, Sophie.
Well, I was talking about the audit, so maybe I should have stayed on mute. Next week is the field audit. It is going to be another virtual audit like we had for our interim testing that we had in June. So Cindy and Tom will likely Zoom in and talk with the auditors at some point next week. But staff's done an amazing job. We actually have all the material to the auditor, I think, that went yesterday. So I'm very pleased with my staff. No weekend chasing things down, which is good. Preliminary official statement, which is the lion's share of the heavy lifting for the finance department with regard to the refunding of the bonds, is in draft form, and Dick Ranigan has what he needs, so we will have a new preliminary official statement. As soon as I have that, I will zap it out to people. My understanding is that Cindy and Tom are going to join us for the rating calls, which are scheduled for next week. So we are well on our way with that process. I sent you an email about some concerns around silver maples on Hamlin Street. Just wanted to let you know that the tree board is holding a meeting at 5 o'clock on Friday. It is a Zoom meeting, so their agenda is posted in the agenda center for people to see if they so choose. Also want to give a big shout out to our volunteer appeals board. So we had an appeal of 2 building permits that were issued by the code office, and they were issued several months ago. Went through the process with our appeals board members, who I promised they wouldn't have to serve very much, and they got hit with a big, huge appeal record. So they did a lot of heavy lifting for us, and did a very nice job, and took their role very, very seriously. So just want to give a shout out to those volunteers who serve on these boards, that we wouldn't be able to get town business done if we didn't have them. They did an amazing job for us. And I say that even though they overturned both of the permits. So it isn't that they did what I wanted, it was that they did a nice, thoughtful job. And I want to just give you a heads up, the council workshop agenda has been posted. A couple of items of interest on that. There's a citizen who has requested that the council consider a resolution. So on universal health care, I will put that in your packet for you to review, but they're going to be at the workshop. Discussions about the next steps forward with regard to honoring Orono's history and our collaborative potential future collaboration with the Penobscot Nation. And also next step forward with regard to racial equity and justice in Orono. And then the final piece, Dave Mylan is going to be back with us on Monday night. He has gone through his Rolodex and used his network, and we cannot find a private partner to partner with for the redevelopment of the former Public Works facility garage, 98 Penobscot Street. We have received a verbal offer. I'm not aware that they've followed it up yet in writing, but it was for a very small amount of money. And you might agree with it, but we really think it's time that if that offer isn't here by Monday, when we meet, that we're talking with you about what is it that you either really want on the site or that you really don't want on the site, so that we can put it on the market for sale. We just don't think that the environment is ripe for a public-private partnership. We do, if we want to hold it, we can absolutely do that. The building has, Rob has done a yeoman's job trying to make it vandal-proof, and they still seem to find ways around that. So it is not a piece of property. I don't think we want it to sit vacant for forever. And so I think you're going to have to give some thought as to what comes next. So that's what's on the agenda for the riveting council workshop. And Cindy, are you doing an executive session on that one or the week of the 28th?
I was hoping the 28th.
Perfect. I'll put it there.
It's so funny, Sophie, when you sit there and you say my staff is amazing. I would be like floored if you came in and said like, okay, I've got issues with my staff, because that's so not typical.
So, I will tell you, the thing I like about my staff is that we all know that nobody is perfect, but I think what we have are people that are really dedicated and work really hard and want to be the best that they can be. There's a high standard here, and yeah, they are pretty amazing.
Yes, you are.
Sophie, sorry, I was just going to ask, you mentioned on Monday that there was an issue with the scripture memorial dinner. Is that all solved?
No, it's not. We're still working on kind of trying to create the framework, Megan, that I'm hoping in my manager's report, people can help me lay in the path forward once I understand kind of the rules. I'm trying to understand from my public health team how we can, I think there's some concern about having people, for example, cook turkeys in residential places and then courier them to the senior center. So I think we've got some issues as far as the logistics of having people that we can set up a nice process for to divide out the food and pack up the to-go containers. I think we can absolutely do that. The challenge that we're stumbling over right now is how to get things cooked in a safe way. So I hope that my team and I will come up with some options that you guys might be able to use your wonderful network to help us solve. That's the goal.
You mean like if only you had someone on council who owns a restaurant kitchen and has a kitchen staff?
Kind of like that, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Sophie, are we all done with the property assessments too? Is that all done? No.
No, I talked with a group, Cheryl, maybe it was not a group that you were at, but with our code enforcement vacancy,
Oh yeah.
Mike has had to turn his attention there. Vision's doing a good job. Mike is staying on top of it. We meet weekly to review where he is. He is where we would expect to be. I think our plan at this point is that by the time I am ready to drop a budget in the beginning of May, end of April, beginning of May, we will have a good number. And the plan would be to have the hearings, which is just a fancy way of saying residents will get their values and be able to come in and schedule a time to meet with the assessor to talk about why they've changed. Those are planned for the beginning of June at this point, and then we're really on target to be able to maintain that. In doing it that way, it will hopefully leave us in really good stead to have a new value. And Mike has got me all excited because we're seeing property values increase. And yesterday, as I wandered through, he said, I hope I haven't gotten you too excited. But I think we're right on target. We're seeing some good growth in value.
Thank you, Soph.
Great. Is there anything else anybody has to add, or are we all good? So I will say we'll adjourn the meeting and say goodbye to everybody. We'll see you on Monday.
All right, good night.
Night.